All right, it's 12:01, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Our presenter is Alexandra, is it Baig? Bag?
Big.
Sorry, I don't Baig from Pathways to Benefits. And she is going to be talking about SSI, SSDI. Pathways to Benefits helps those with disabilities and their families, apply for benefits, understand their benefits. So we're very excited to have you here today. And with that, I'll let you take it away.
Great. I will share my slides and we'll get started. Oh, I think you have to give me permission to share.
Oh, okay. Yep. One of us will do that really quickly here.
Let me know when that's turned on.
Okay, almost there. Uh, I've lost it, Sarah.
I think if you make me a co-host,
Yeah,
that's
can you
the
just make her a co-host? I don't think I can
Okay.
because
Yep.
I'm the co-host. I think it has to come from you.
Okay. Just made you a co-host.
all right. If that did it,
See if that does it for us.
that did it.
All righty.
All right. So bear with me for a minute while my computer works its way into sharing. Let me know when you see the slides because I think there's a bit of a lag time. On my side, it looks like it's showed up. Could you tell me if you can see it on your side?
Yep, we got it.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to walk first through the outline of the process because sometimes people want to know the mechanics of this, particularly if their children or young adults are approaching that pivotal age of 18. And then we'll go through the qualifications, what Social Security is looking for, and we'll go through the something about the nature of the different benefits and how they work. So right now, there are just two ways to start your disability application. You can phone your local office to schedule a phone call, right, to initiate the application. You can never do it on the initial call because they need a specialist, but you can call and say, I would like to help my son or daughter apply for Social Security disability benefits, and they will put you in the calendar at the next available time, and then they will call you, either the student or the parent or however that's set up, right? And the second way is to submit an application online via SSA.gov. My preference is the second, although it requires a little bit more setup at the beginning because it gives you more control over the process. But in fact, either way works. Right. So the online access, this is a little bit important. It's helpful to have this online access eventually, even if you don't start the application that way, because it's by far the best way to get additional documents to Social Security. Right. So you're doing this all on behalf of or with your teenage child. Right. So to create the My Social Security account, you go to SSA.gov. It walks you through creating an identity verification account with login.gov or id.me, and you have to help the person verify their identity. With young people, this generally requires using a second process, not the automated process. Typically, for example, with ID.me, there's the option to use a video call. You usually have to do that because the young people don't have enough data out there on the internet to verify them through the automatic self-serve version. All right, so whether you go by phone or you start online, you need to understand how a person is considered eligible for disability benefits under Social Security for an adult. So we're talking about students in transition, we're talking about students 18 or over, right? So this is the Social Security definition of having a disability, right? So you need that medically determinable condition. Now, medically, it's a little bit expansive, it includes psychologically and other ways, but that impairment that is expected to last at least a year or end in death. Now, in the case of our students, it will be lasting a year or more. And then, and this is the really important part of the definition, you have to demonstrate that the impairment prohibits the applicant from working enough to earn substantial gainful activity, or SGA, right? So for 2026, the substantial gainful activity threshold is $1,690 in gross earned income per month, unless the person is statutorily blind, in which case they have a higher level. All right, so this is how Social Security runs the evaluation. It has 5 steps. So that very first step is the person performing substantial gainful activity, or have they done so in the recent past? If a student is working, it is likely that it's a very part-time position and they're not working at a level where they would be exceeding substantial gainful activity. I've sometimes run into trouble when I have people come to me later on after they've exited the school system and they may be working at or close to that threshold. Then we have challenges. So the first question is, how much are they earning from work, right? If not much or nothing at all, then they go on to whether the impairments are severe. And severe is a pretty subjective criteria. So typically we move through that question to question 3. This is where most of the people I help are approved. Do the applicant's symptoms meet or equal one of Social Security's cataloged listings of impairments, right? So that's what we're looking to do usually with the students. If they don't, then they're going to go on to a lot of other questions about their capacity for work, their educational background, things like that. But we try to get everybody approved at step 3, particularly those students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Okay, so here's an example of one of these listing categories, right? So 12.05 is intellectual disability. So this is very specific, right? So the person has to have an IQ 70 or lower, or an IQ between 70 and 75 with certain of the subtest scores below 70, and significant limitations in adaptive behavior. Right? So if we have those criteria in the IEP or in the neuropsychological report, we can then say that the student meets or equals the 12.05 listing criteria. Right? So autism, another one that we see a lot. Right? So autism, if you're going to apply under the category of autism, the student needs to have qualitative deficits in communication and significantly restricted repetitive patterns of behaviors. Okay? And they have to generate marked limitations in those 4 points below. So, for example, in IEPs, when in the school system you're looking at those autism criteria, they are similar to, but not exactly the same as the adult criteria. It's really helpful if a child is getting services under the special education category of autism. It's really helpful if there's documentation in the IEP of both the deficits in communication and social interaction and restrictive repetitive patterns of behavior. Now, of course, if the student doesn't have one or other of those, you can't say that they do, but it's helpful if they have both of those parts in. All right. Down syndrome. This one is actually pretty straightforward because there is a genetic test for it, but this is what they look for Down syndrome. So these are just examples. There are many, many, many other categories, but the goal is to find the category that best fits the student and then assemble from their supporting documents the evidence that they do, in fact, meet those criteria. All right, so this is where we get to how, right? How do we find that evidence? Well, you do need something from an accepted source. Now, although it's mostly medical sources that are listed there, they do accept for students in transition, 18-year-olds, they do accept, at least initially, documents from the school psychologist, maybe the school social worker, right? Somebody who has the capacity to do some of those tests. Right? So you need to have evidence of the condition from an accepted source, right? And you can also provide other evidence. Now, generally find this in the IEP. So we're looking for evidence of how the conditions could potentially limit the person's capacity to work, right? So we're looking for how the kind of supports they have in school that would translate to supports they would need in the workplace, and that without those supports, they would be limited in how much they could earn. So the IEP is a really critical document, and anything related to it, behavior plan or communication plan or protocol, anything like that, it's really one of the main documents that a lot of students will use if they're applying right at 18. For this reason, Social Security is really fond of updated test results. And I try to argue this wherever possible. Generally speaking, a person's IQ does not change a whole lot, at least once they've entered into their later teenage years. But Social Security does prefer to have test results that aren't more than a couple of years old, maybe no more than 3. So even though there may be no reason from the IEP point of view to redo some of this testing, it might be a good idea to help set students up for success in their Social Security applications, as long as the school has the capacity to run those tests. Otherwise, the parents may have to go outside to get those tests done, and that can be time consuming and expensive. Okay, so for the steps for application, again, they prefer, and I prefer, to start the application online, but you can do it the other way. Once you have submitted the online application, and I will say when I work directly with clients, we walk through that application together. So we use Zoom, client opens the application for their son or daughter, we screen share, we go through all the questions together. If it's a phone interview, I tend to be a third party on the phone, right? So once that application is submitted, then there may be, and generally are, follow-up steps, right? So often Social Security will want to call and speak to the student and the parent. If the parent is the legal guardian, Social Security will be willing to speak to the parent, but they will ask that somewhere in this process you supply them with the letter of office for guardianship. They may send additional forms. Right, so these are just some of the examples of the additional forms. These generally arrive by mail, and then the person, with the support of their family and sometimes the parents doing a third-party report, have to fill out those forms and send them back. Right, this is just, again, to acquire more evidence of the level of support that the applicant needs. Okay, if the application is denied, and yes, this does happen, always appeal. And you can appeal multiple times. I am working on the 4th appeal for a particular young lady. I think we'll get it through, but it just takes persistence and sometimes the gathering of more evidence. Okay. Social Security determines that the person is eligible for disability benefits. That is, they are disabled according to Social Security's definition. These are the benefits that the person may be eligible for, either singly or in some combination, right?
What are you pass? What are you pass? Finish?
Supplemental Security Income, SSI, which is a means tested cash benefit. We'll talk more about what means tested is. Medicaid, so Supplemental Security Income, SSI, and Medicaid, which typically go together. And then Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, quite different. Also a cash benefit, but very different rules. Social Security for Disabled Adult Children, which is frequently called the Childhood Disability Benefit, and then Medicare. So we're going to go through each of these in a little bit of detail. SSI is usually the benefit that most youth are eligible for first when they apply at 18, because it does not require anybody to have a work record, not the student, not the parents, right? Because it's solely based on the fact that they have a disability and they have low income and few assets, right? So we already know that they have to have low income because that's part of the disability definition. And in addition, the person can't have more than $2,000 in countable resources, which is a little, it's specific to SSI. The Medicaid resource limit has now increased. What are resources? Not everything that is an asset is a resource or a countable resource, right? So some things, while they are assets, are not countable resources. So that would include a primary residence, a car, and personal use items. Most youth do not have either a car or a residence that they own in their own name, but just so you know, right? So none of the things that they own personally count as towards that $2,000 limit, but anything that's cash or close to cash or could easily become cash, right? So any type of investments could. A special note on Uniform Gift to Minors Act accounts, so UGMA accounts or UTMA accounts sometimes, those are not the resource of the student at the age of 18, because in Illinois, the age of majority is 21 and the accounts don't transfer. However, they will become the resource of the student at 21. So it's best to think about unwinding or divesting any UTMA or UGMA accounts prior to application. It just makes everything much simpler. Assets held in a trust are not countable as resources, a special needs trust. So if you have a trust for your son or daughter and it is funded, then those are not countable assets. Plan to achieve self-support. That doesn't happen until after you already have benefits, so it's not really relevant to this at this stage. And then ABLE, right? So financial resources held in an ABLE account are exempt from the social SSI resource calculation. There's the question of income, right? So you can get SSI even when you have other income. However, any other income you have reduces how much SSI you can get, right? So according to this formula. So basically, the short version of this formula is that unearned income will reduce SSI dollar for dollar. Earned income reduces SSI about 50 cents on the dollar. Now, most children or young adults who are applying do not have unearned income, but it's possible that they could. And we'll talk about how that could happen. And they might have some unearned income in transition if, for example, they're engaged in work-based learning and they are paid for some of that. SSI rules have kind of some quirky things when it comes to income. What is considered income? Parental income is considered income available to the child who's under 18. And this is why very few children under 18 qualify for SSI, right? Because the parents have too much money, right? If the young person is over 18 and there is a divorce situation and one of the parents is continuing to pay child support, which does happen, then the child support is income to the child at the application, right? So if the parent's getting the child support, but if the child is over 18, that child support is counted as unearned income to him or her. So that could be an issue. And then if the young person is living with others, which most of our youth are, and they don't pay anything to live there, then Social Security considers that they are receiving in-kind income in the form of shelter for free. And they will reduce how much SSI that the young person can get. The way around that is to have the young person pay rent or room and board. And that's why you hear a lot of parents talk about that situation. Once their child becomes 18 and has SSI, they begin to charge them rent. This is why. Okay, Medicaid, right? So SSI and Medicaid go together in a way because they are both limited to people who have low income and or few resources, right? So typically once the child has applied and received SSI, we generally go on and apply for Medicaid for them as well. You can do the Medicaid application concurrently or even prior, but it helps if you've already been determined disabled by Social Security when you file the Medicaid application, right? So there are multiple categories of Medicaid eligibility in Illinois, each of which have their own income and resource limits. Typically, we try to get the youth into the Medicaid eligibility category that is based on disability, not simply on low income, because if the latter and their income rises, they lose their eligibility, right? And just like with SSI, certain resources are not counted for Medicaid purposes, including assets held in a trust and assets held in ABLE accounts. So ABLE function to exempt resources or assets for both SSI and Medicaid purposes. Okay. Medicaid is really important, as we all know, not so much for the health insurance features, although that could be useful, but because adult services are paid for through Medicaid waivers. So if your child is on the PUNS list, and once they exit the school system, you hope that they will be pulled off the PUNS list and offered waiver services, either the home-based waiver or a SILA waiver. They need Medicaid to access those services, right? Because it's Medicaid dollars that pay the providers, right? That's where the money comes from. So we really want to make sure that people get their Medicaid application going. All right, SSI, Medicaid. Then there's SSDI, right? So SSDI is an earned benefit. It's not a means tested benefit that's just given because you have very little income. It's a benefit you earn because you work and you pay into the Social Security system. So just like anybody else, youth with disabilities who finds a job and starts getting a paycheck will be contributing to Social Security by paying their FICA tax, right? And as they do that, they will accumulate Social Security credits just like everybody else. In 2026, a person gets 1 credit for each $1,890 in gross earnings, and a person can get 4 credits a year. No matter how much you work, you can only get 4. Okay. The first part isn't as relevant because we're not there yet. We'll get to that part later, but the next bullet point is important. So when you are a young person, you need less credits to be insured for SSDI, right? So if you get along quite far in your work life, you're going to need 40 credits, just like for retirement. But for young people, they need far less. And the minimum you need is 6 credits in the 3 years before you apply if you are less than 24 years old, right? So if the student has not yet turned 24 and they have already been working and accumulated 6 credits, they may be eligible for SSDI already, right? So it's good to keep track of that. If your student is working, you're going to want to keep track of how many credits they're accumulating, right? Then there's another type of benefit which works like SSDI, but it's not based on the student's work record. It's based on the parent's work record. And this is what Social Security calls a childhood disability benefit, not because you get it in childhood, but because your disability started in childhood. So this is for a person who has a disability that starts before the age of 22, which all of the students with intellectual and developmental disabilities have, and they've maintained that disabled status all the way through to the point at which one of their parents files for Social Security benefits, disability benefits, or retirement benefits. It will also apply if a parent dies, and the person then becomes eligible for survivor's benefits. With the exception of the survivor situation, the maximum amount that a youth or an adult with disabilities can get on a parent's work record is about 50% of what the parent gets at his or her full retirement age, right? And the child is technically eligible on both parents' work records, but will only be paid on one. So they'll be paid on the first parent to file, and then if the second parent files and has a higher benefit, they will move up to that level. Okay. This is just a kind of a complicated slide and maybe beyond the scope of this talk, but there's just to say that when you get to that point where parents are filing and the adult child might be getting an additional benefit, there is a family maximum. So at that point, it's probably good to sit down with someone and look at what filing strategy is best for the parents. But in most cases with transition students, that's sort of down the road. There's a few exceptions, but often that's something we'd be looking at later. Okay. So we talked a little bit back, a few slides back, about what happens with SSI, and I said that there is a formula so that if you have other sources of income, it will reduce how much SSI you get paid. SSDI and also that disabled adult child benefit work differently. Those are all or nothing benefits. You either get it or you don't get it, right? Unearned income does not affect SSDI or DAC benefits at all. You can have lots and lots of unearned income and you would still be eligible for SSDI or the DAC benefit. Earned income does, right? So if your earned income exceeds that substantial gainful activity level consistently, not just once, there's a process for this, but if it does it consistently, then according to Social Security, the person is no longer disabled. And even if they still have the impairments and all of the conditions, right? So if they earn too much, they might reach a point where they are not eligible for SSDI at all. And the same can happen with that childhood disability benefit, also called the DAC, Disabled Adult Child Benefit. Okay. If SSI goes together with Medicaid, SSDI goes together with Medicare. So here's what happens. Medicare, the same Medicare that is available to seniors, everybody when they turn 65, as long as they paid their Medicare tax, that is also available to people with disabilities who have been getting a SSDI or a DAC benefit for 24 months, right? So you could have a young person who gets those 6 credits before they turn 24, and then they're insured for SSDI, and they might have Medicare by the time they turn 26, right? So that's how Medicare works. So sometimes there's an incentive to put the child to work to help them get those credits and get on SSDI on their own work record so that they can start that 24-month clock ticking to Medicare eligibility. Some parents have a sense of relief when their child is eligible for Medicare, because then it's less important how long the parents maintain their employer group coverage, right? Because Medicare is pretty decent health insurance. Medicaid, not so much. Medicare is pretty good. So if parents are thinking, well, could be retiring soon, might get off my employer group plan, what will happen to my child's health insurance? If the adult child is already Medicare eligible, that's the answer, right? And you can be, if you have a disability, you can have both Medicare and Medicaid simultaneously. In fact, you can have Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance simultaneously. It's a little bit complicated, but you can. Okay, so big question, and we're going to go over just a little bit again, just to present it in a slightly different way, because sometimes families are concerned. We want the child or the adult child to work, but we're concerned what happens if he or she works too much? What happens to their benefits? Are they at risk for losing those benefits? So that's what we talked about with SSI, is if the young person has SSI and works, their SSI will be reduced, roughly 50 cents less for every dollar they earn. However, the person remains categorically eligible for SSI as long as they need to be reporting their wages, as long as they're reporting their wages, and as long as the countable resources do not go over $2,000, and as long as the medical conditions don't improve, which they really can't with intellectual or developmental disability, then the SSI may be reduced to a point where it's even zero. But if the earnings go back down again, the SSI comes back, right? So SSI eligibility keeps on going, right? Even if you earn too much. You may reach a point where you're not getting any cash paid to you for SSI. But if your earnings drop again, you will be eligible again, or you'll start the cash payment again. SSDI is different, right? So it's an all or nothing. So there's 3 steps for SSDI. They first look at, is the person reaching a threshold called the trial work threshold, which is lower than the substantial gainful activity threshold. And every month that the person on SSDI earns up to the trial work level, they check a box. And once you have 9 boxes checked, you're done with your trial work period. So that could be 9 months, one after the other, or it could be 1 month, then 2 months you didn't get it, then in month 3 you get another one, so on, right? So, but once you have 9 of those trial work months, that is the end of the trial work period. Then Social Security takes 3 years to compare whether you are hitting that substantial gainful activity level. During that 3-year period, if you hit the substantial gainful level, you don't get your benefit check or deposit. If you do not hit it, you do. So during that 3-year period, your SSDI might be on again, off again, on again, off again, depending on how much you earn in each month. At the end of that period, they look, are you still earning above the substantial gainful activity level? And if yes, that's it, you're done, right? You are no longer disabled according to their definition. So that's how SSDI works, right? I'm going to go through just quickly, just show that there are some ways to reduce how much earned income is counted. So this can sometimes put families at ease, right? So they're concerned, okay, we want my child to work. My child has done some internship or work-based learning in their school setting. The goal is to help them get out into the adult world and have a job, at least a part-time job. We know that there's these different thresholds they can't exceed. What else can we have that will help us manage that? So there are certain ways or certain processes within the Social Security regulations that can reduce how much of a person's earned income they count for either SSI payment or SSDI eligibility purposes. So I'm going to skip ticket to work for right now because it doesn't really apply to students. Often ticket to work is something they would use after they get out of the school system. And it's really designed to help the person get employment. It's not a cash benefit. It is services to help them get employment. But some of the ways that you can reduce how much earned income Social Security counts are the earned income exclusions, right? So these apply only to SSI, right? And they were shown in the equation back a bit, which is that the first $65 a month that a person earns, or $85 a month if they have no unearned income, is excluded. And then half of everything else, right? That is why the SSI reduction for earned income is only about 50 cents for every dollar earned, because they don't count all of the earned income. They only count a little less than half. For students, though, there is a really generous earned income exclusion. Not sure how this came about. Maybe it's because they want to support students who might be paying for post-secondary education. But students who have SSI for disability can earn a lot more, and their SSI is not reduced. So it's really important when the person is applying at age 18 to indicate if he or she is a full-time student. You can be a full-time student if you are still in K-12. You can be a full-time student if you are in transition, but the transition program has to be have vocational aspects to it. And then you can also be a full-time student or a student if you are in a post-secondary program of some kind. Note that this student earned income exclusion does stop when the student turns 22, regardless of whether he or she is still in school. Just stops at 22. Okay. Both SSI and SSDI, there is also this concept of impairment-related work expenses. And these are things that, goods or services that the person needs because of their disability, and he or she needs them to work and pays for them out of pocket, right? So I've listed a few examples on there of things that could be considered impairment-related work expenses. And what happens is, if you have any of these things, you present them to Social Security, and Social Security needs to see the details, and then they should approve those. And then when you report your earned income, they subtract those impairment-related work expenses. So if I'm a student and I'm working and I'm earning, I don't know, $800 a month, but I have $200 worth of impairment-related work expenses, guess what? Social Security only counts $600 worth. For SSDI purposes, that's not as, it's not as meaningful, but for SSI purposes, it means I get more SSI because less of my earned income counts. For SSDI purposes, it only matters if I'm getting close to one of those thresholds. Okay, so then there's this interesting concept of employer subsidies. So this is kind of an unusual concept, but basically what this is Social Security is trying to look at the value of the work that the person does, somewhat independently of how much they're paid to do it. because the thought process is some people with disabilities, not all, but some may get accommodations at work. And because of these accommodations, the person with the disability may produce less work than someone who doesn't have those accommodations. Right? So, for example, if the person with a disability is permitted to have more breaks than another person for whatever reason, they tire too quickly or they need a sensory break or whatever, it's clear that if they take more breaks, they're not doing the same amount of work, right? Or they may be allowed to work at a slower pace, right? Or they may be required only to do certain parts of the job, right? There might be some job carving where they don't have to fulfill all the responsibilities of the role, right? So these things can result in Social Security counting less of a person's earned income. There is paperwork for this, and the employer has to also complete a form. So it's helpful, but it does take some effort. Okay. Then there's this, some people are thinking more about, okay, well, cash is one thing that's important, but what about Medicaid, right? Because we all know that Medicaid also has some income limitations. So when a person has SSI and Medicaid, there are these two provisions, 1619A and B. 1619A basically says that even if you exceed substantial gainful activity due to the SSI reduction formula, you can still get a little bit of SSI. 1619B says that if you have Medicaid and SSI together, but then you work a lot so that you no longer get paid any SSI, right? Your SSI payable goes to zero. You are still categorically eligible for Medicaid. This is really, really important because, again, the goal might be for a young person to work, but we may know that that young person is going to need those Medicaid waiver services for the rest of his or her life. So we want to make sure that Medicaid stays in place, right? So 1619B is really valuable for that. 1634 is a little bit similar. 1634 says that a person who gets SSI and then later stops getting SSI because their parent retires, and because of that, they get this DAC benefit that's so large that they no longer get any SSI because DAC offsets SSI. Then they're still eligible for Medicaid, right? So if they have SSI and Medicaid together, parent retires, they start getting the DAC benefit. The DAC benefit's so large that on the dollar for dollar reduction, they no longer get SSI. They're still Medicaid eligible, right? And then there is a similar one called the Pickle Amendment, which basically says if you would be getting SSI, except your own disability benefit goes up, your SSDI goes up because of cost of living adjustment, you still eligible. So that one we don't run into quite as much. All right, there are a couple of other things. If a young person starts to work and they can't work, they maybe work for a month or two and then it fails, that's an unsuccessful work attempt, and Social Security may not even look at that at all when they consider if they're still meeting the disability definition. And then finally, if some young people missed the SSI boat, because sometimes a student might skip that SSI stage. This happens, for example, when the student applies at 18 and he or she already has the 6 credits, or it could happen because they apply at 18 and they already have a parent receiving a retirement benefit or a disability benefit. They might skip the SSI stage and go straight to the DAC stage. When that happens, if they skip the SSI stage for whatever reason, or they simply earn too much money, there is health benefits for workers with disabilities, which is that Medicaid option for workers who have too much income. And it has a pretty reasonable threshold. So it's a way to ensure that the person still has access to Medicaid services, even if they're working at a certain level. I'm not going to go through PASS right now because it's a little complicated. The gist of a PASS, plan to achieve self-support, is that you can, the student or the person receiving SSI can save money for a work-related goal, and it will not count towards that $2,000 asset limit. They can save money and it won't count toward the asset limit. And any earned income that they direct towards that plan will not reduce their SSI. So it's basically saying, okay, if the person has a work goal, let's say they want to go to a community college and obtain a certificate in something, but that costs money, they can save money towards that goal and it won't mess with their SSI eligibility. They do have to write up the plan. There's a long form for it and it has to be approved. And they then have to follow the plan and use the money for what they said they were going to use it for. Okay. And then there's ABLE. So ABLE is a useful way for a young person with disabilities to have resources, assets, and still keep their SSI and or Medicaid eligibility. Right? So as long as the ABLE account balance does not exceed $100,000, the ABLE account holder, who is the person with the disability, is still eligible for SSI. So this can be useful. Maybe you have a student who has some assets before they apply. Maybe there is one of those UTMA accounts, or maybe there's money that, parents and grandparents have given them for holidays or whatever. They have some resources. They can put it into an ABLE account and then it won't count anymore. It also works if the student starts working and they're like, okay, well, they're working, they're earning some money. They're not spending a lot of money because mom and dad are still paying for pretty much everything. Where do we put the extra money they're earning? You can put it into an ABLE account, right? For SSI purposes, the balance cannot exceed $100,000. For Medicaid purposes, though, there is a much higher limit. So you can put quite a bit of money into ABLE and not have a problem with Medicaid. 2026 contribution limit is $20,000 per year from all sources, unless the person is working, in which case they can contribute an additional amount as long as they are not contributing to their employer retirement plan. So ABLE can be really helpful, right? If there is a question of a young person who either wants to apply or has already received the benefits and they're accumulating too much money, this is where you can put it. The only downside to ABLE is, and you can invest the funds in ABLE. The one thing about ABLE is it does have a payback provision such that if the person who owns the ABLE account dies and there's still money in the ABLE account and they have used Medicaid for long-term care purposes, not health insurance, but long-term care purposes, such as living in a solo home, then Medicaid has a state recovery claim on those assets, but only after the person is dead. I think that was pretty much all that I wanted to go through, which is quite a lot. I wanted to leave some time for questions because there usually are some. So I'm going to stop there. That is my contact information. And I think the QR code will work. It should take you direct to the website. But if not, you can just go to the website. I am always available for consultations. Initial consultations are at no charge, just to really see what topics you might want to talk about. So I am going to stop sharing if I could find how to do that. I can't quite. I'm going to try to hit the non-sharing, the stop share button. And I'm happy to answer questions.
If you want to come off chat. Oh, there you go.
Hi, I have a question. I guess you probably talked about it in the beginning, but my Zoom was not cooperating when I was trying to log into the webinar, and it took me a few minutes to figure out what is happening. Before you can apply for SSI online, you have to create the login.gov account, correct?
Yes.
If you have a son or daughter, a student, a person that just turned 18, there is not much that the login can bounce the information off and verify their information. So we couldn't find the records matching your personal information messages coming up on the screen, and it's not allowing you to move on with the process. when you call the login.gov number, one of the pre-recorded messages says that if you recently turned 18, the system might not have enough information to verify your information online. What is your suggestions? What to do? I know that somewhere I heard about going to post office, but do you know how do you verify? Because, calling SSI is 90 minutes wait that become 9 days wait.
Right. And also you get stuck in a loop because SSI says we can't do that. Login.gov does it. And they say, anyway. So, okay.
Correct.
There are a choice of two platforms. I'm a little biased. I recommend ID.me. So you can use login.gov or ID.me. I recommend ID.me for two reasons. The first is that they have the option to do a video call. A short video call, or sometimes you need a longer video call. So you, instead of doing the self-service option, you do have to upload the front and back of the driver's license or state ID. So yes, all of your young adults need to have a state ID. Right? So that's the first thing. If they don't have that, they need to go out and get it. Front and back of state ID, selfie of the person. Then you can select the video call option, and it will ask you before the video call, it will ask you to upload additional identity documents such as birth certificate or social security card, passport, like the page of the passport. Sometimes they will accept a W-2 or a pay stub as well if the student is working. So there's various things. They have lists on the website. If you go to ID.me, they will tell you what other documents. And then you will be put into a queue for the video call. If the queue is getting long, you have the option to schedule at a different time. You will be connected with a live person at ID.me, and they will look at the person, see the documents, and verify them that way. As an additional step, if the parent needs to assist because the young person can't really fully get through the process on their own, ID.me will also then verify the parent's identity and ask them for some example of like legal guardianship. Then the parent will be allowed to help. As a last resort, and this is the main reason why I direct people to ID.me, I do know some people there, and so people can email me and I can connect them with the escalation folks at ID.me and say, hey, we're having this problem. Because I've done this a few times, the folks at ID.me are aware that this is an ongoing problem for young people. They are working internally to try to maybe create more of a streamlined process for young people. So you're right, that can be a real, and then the last resort is if we can't get through the process and we just get too frustrated, we start with the phone call instead. But
phone call to who? To login.gov or to SSI office?
No, I mean, to start the application process, you can make a phone call to ssa.gov rather than use the online approach.
So yeah. If the process of creating the account with login.gov was started but not finished, that will not jeopardize the process with ID.me.
No, it should not, as long as you didn't finish it. Yeah.
No, because the parents got to the I just said this, to the verify my ID, verify view information, and there is not enough information in a system to verify. Here is my other question. Yeah. You mentioned that the student, the person applying, has to have a state ID. What if the state ID was done 5 years ago and it's valid for 10, and the person on the ID look completely different than the real person?
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I know most young people, I don't know how early they typically get a state ID. Most young people get their state ID or driver's license when they turn 16, right? So there's usually not that long a time, right?
In this case, there is, because I think that this student was like, I don't know, it's 18 right now, and the picture is very babyish, so maybe like 8 years ago. So will you suggest to get a new one? updated?
You might want to get an updated one, yeah. And I think right now, I don't know. I know for driver's license, they may not be. It may be different for young people, but I know like for driver's license, if you have one, you can even update it by mail, I think. But that I would suggest maybe getting an updated.
Yeah. But the updated by mail will have still the same picture, so you have to go and take.
I would suggest maybe getting that. Going to the DMV.
Okay. So what's the post office? Are you aware of the post office option?
That's the login.gov alternative. So ID.me has the video call, and login.gov has the post office. I believe it's possible. I think I had at least one client that did do that got an appointment at the post office and then took the student with their identity documents to the post office. I'm just not as familiar with that.
So the question would be to the post office. Ask them if they are familiar with it and how do they do this.
Because I'm not sure all the post offices do it. I would go to your local one and see if this is something that they.
But that is still a valid option for the login.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone else has questions, feel free to come off mute or put them in the chat. I did actually have a question.
Sure.
So you did talk about a little bit about SSI and Medicaid. So I have heard that, if you have SSI, you're found SSI eligible, then it's easier to get approved for adult Medicaid. So if families are applying for SSI for their child when they turn 18, can they apply for Medicaid right after, or do they still need to wait till 19 for adult Medicaid?
No, you can apply at 18, and you can, as you go through the application, you are a couple things. There's an option to say that you are, so a couple things. They tell you, they ask you which Medicaid do you want to apply for? Do you want to apply for aid to the aged, blind, and disabled, AABD category, or the Affordable Care Act, ACA category? If you pick the aid to the aged, blind, and disabled category, then it should be fine to apply at 18. There will be a question also in the application about whether Social Security has determined you to be disabled, and there is the option to say that it's in progress, right? So you can say that you're waiting for a disability determination, and that should allow you to the person to apply at 18. If they have Medicaid already, because some people do through All Kids or something, then typically you need to wait till the redetermination at 19.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful.
I think that you just answered my question. My question is, if you have a Medicaid from a PANS selection as a child, do you have to reapply at 19?
You have to be redetermined at 19, but it should be pretty straightforward. So at or around 19, the local the DHS office should reach out and say, hey, we need to get updated information. Probably it won't be very complicated, because if you have enough of a disability to have been pulled for the children's waiver, it's pretty significant. So probably shouldn't be difficult.
But the redetermination form has million questions on it. I have a copy somewhere because the parents shared with me, because they said oh, now what? They ask for all of the people that live in the house. They ask for pay stubs from all of the people. They ask for work information, all of those information. Should they put all of the information in the redetermination, even if the child is 18?
So
and receive waiver money?
No. So when the child is 18, and I'd have to look at the paper form for redetermination, but for sure, and this is a helpful hint if you're applying for the first time using the online application, so we'll have to see how it translates to the REDI. The child is their own household, right? So at 18, they are their own household for the disabled version of Medicaid, right? That eligibility category. So in that case, they should not have to include anybody else's information. So the key is on the form somewhere, it should be who else is in your household, and the correct answer to that should be no one, right? So just the student.
The form came with the pre-filled names of the household. What I suggested to the parent, and I said, I don't know, you don't have to use my advice. I said, fill out all of the information that pertained to the son. It was a son to him. And on the very end of the form, include his Medicaid number, include his waiver identification, and describe that he is already receiving Medicaid based on the PONS selection. Since whatever information you can find, put it on the back. And if they because it says on the form that if we need, we will contact you for more information. If they need more information, they will contact you. So
that should help. And you might, if they already have applied for SSI, you could add that information in.
This is the same family who give me the screenshot of login.gov. They tried, but they get stuck on that page. So and mom is like, oh my God, now he's gonna lose Medicaid. Mom is in a complete panic stage, and I'm trying to help. And I was hoping she's gonna join, but she didn't today. But I will.
Yeah. So the login.gov is probably fixable using ID.me. It's not to say it'll be easy, but they can, they could probably work with that. And then what was I going to say? Oh, the Medicaid thing. I think you're right. It probably, because Medicaid folks are not as familiar with children on the waiver since they're on a whole lot of them. Probably you are going to need to talk to a live person at the Medicaid office and send the paperwork in, but somewhere on the paperwork say that this is the situation, and they will probably have to call and talk about it.
That's what I said. So now we're waiting what the Medicaid rep is gonna say about this whole determination.
Oh.
It looks like there was a question in the chat. Someone asked, how far along should you be in the guardianship process before applying for SSI?
Right. So the two are independent. However, if the parent is going to talk on behalf of the young person on any phone calls, then the Social Security office, most of them, sometimes they give a little on this, but most of them will say, we want to see the letter of office, which you can't have until you've completed the guardianship process. So because the SSI process itself takes some time usually, I often say to parents, as long as you've got the process started, maybe even you have some engagement letter from the attorney or whatever, if you have something started, then we can probably get the SSI process started. And when they ask, you can say, well, we've started the guardianship process. We're working with this attorney or whatever. Our court date is this date, and then when you have it, you want to take the letter of office to your local Social Security office. So it really only applies if they need to talk to the parent over the phone. And sometimes they're okay doing it anyway. All of the paperwork in the online application, it doesn't matter if you have guardianship or not. So.
Okay, great. That was actually the other thing that I was going to ask, because I get asked a lot from parents about kind of like the timeline of when things should be happening. And I know SSI has kind of given a little bit, or SSA has given a little bit more pushback about getting that guardianship piece completed before, where they used to be a little bit more lenient about, doing those interviews and phone calls. So I usually recommend they do the guardianship process first, just to make sure that SSI, there's no roadblocks in that area. But that's good to know if they have any kind of documentation or paperwork they can show, like it's in the works, then they can get that going.
And in the online application, there's a section where they ask if you want to have advanced designees, it's sort of a list of 2 people who could become your rep payee once you get approved. And so sometimes when the parents are in that list, because typically it is the parents that we put on at that space, that does help as well. And there's another section in the application that says, if you would like somebody to help you with this application, you could put their information here. And we put the parent's name in again there. So that can help as well.
Okay.
But I wish I had a hard and fast answer, but sometimes it really does vary by office. Some offices are nicer than others when it it comes to this.
Okay. Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, if anyone else has anything else, please jump in, but that was everything that was in the chat. Thank you so much for being with us today. You know, I learned a lot, your wealth of information, and thank you for sharing your contact information as well, so families can continue to reach out.
I just want to say that this is my second webinar with you, Alexandra, this in the last 2 weeks, and you are phenomenal.
Well, thank you. I enjoy doing this, and I really do want parents, and we all do. We want parents to have the right information, because nothing is more frustrating or sadder than something gets missed because, you know, people didn't know what they didn't know, and then, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the goal. So thank you so much
All right, you're
for your
welcome.
time. Yeah, I hope everyone has a good day.
Yep. Happy Ash Wednesday for those who observe it. I'm not sure happy is the right word, but you know what I mean. So. Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.